Now we got it? Okay. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Three broke kids from Flint, Michigan, sold out a stadium faster than the Beatles, and then watched a sheriff take their guitars away backstage.
As long as we can make it to the show tonight, we're an American.
Years later, two of them would legally lock the third out of the very name they built together. Today, I'm breaking down how this happened. From their working class beginnings to the stadium boom to the lawsuits, betrayal, and the weird reality of Grand Funk Railroad in 2025. Because how do you go from brothers on stage to enemies in court over a logo? Flint to feedback. To understand why this story hurts so much, you have to start in Flint in the 1950s and 60s. Flint was a General Motors town, assembly lines, steel, the smell of paint, and oil. If you grew up there, your future was simple. School, then a job on the line if you were lucky. No trust funds, no safety net. Mark Farner grew up watching his dad come home from the Buick plant exhausted. Mark struggled with dyslexia, so school wasn't his path. Music was. He picked up a guitar and found out he had something most people don't. A voice that could cut through noise like a siren and a natural feel for melody. Don Brewer, the future drummer, was the kid who banged on everything. Pots, pans, tabletops, whatever made a sound. His parents got him a drum kit when he was still a teenager, probably just to save the furniture. These two first crossed paths in a band called The Pack. It wasn't some big rock dream yet. They were doing local gigs, high school dances, driving junk cars, loading their own gear. They cut a few regional singles, played covers, tried originals. They got just enough attention to think, maybe this could be something, but not enough to actually make a living. And then there was Mel Shacker. Mel was the quiet one. He had already done something almost no teenager in Flint did. He'd actually tasted real success. He played bassin in the Mysterians, the band behind 96 Tears, a legit top 40 hit. That song hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1966. For a minute, Mel saw what it was like to be in a band people actually knew. He also saw how fast it could fade. By the late 60s, the Pack had stalled, Question Mark and the Mysterians were fading, but something in the air was changing. Rock music was getting louder, heavier, less polished. Cream, the Jimi Hendrix Experience, power trios that sounded like armies. Mark and Don had an idea. What if they stripped it all down to the basics? No horns, no strings, no fancy arrangements, just three guys, guitar, bass, drums, maximum volume, simple riffs, big choruses. Something that sounded like the factories they grew up around. Not cute, not clever, just heavy. They called Mel. Mel left a semi-famous band to join two guys whose last group had gone nowhere. On paper, that was a bad move. But when they got in a room together, something clicked. Mel's bass didn't just follow the guitar, it bulldozed along with it. Don's drums were straight ahead, almost military. Mark's guitar and vocals sat on top like a siren. No keyboards, no backup singers, no plan B. Now they just needed someone to get them out of Flint. Enter Terry Knight. Knight had once been a singer himself, then a DJ, and he understood both sides of the music business. He knew how labels thought, how radio programmers thought, and most important, he knew how musicians thought. Desperate, hopeful, easy to control if you promise them the world. He'd worked with the Pack before, so Mark and Don already knew him. He steps in and says, "I can make you huge. I'll handle the business, you focus on the music." That sounds great when you're a broke musician. Knight helped them pick a name. They chose Grand Funk Railroad, a play on the Grand Trunk Western Railroad line that ran through Michigan. It sounded big, industrial, unstoppable. It wasn't elegant. It didn't need to be. But here's the first crack in the story. Before there was even a record deal, Terry Knight made sure everything went through him. Contracts, label talks, money flows, publishing. If you wanted grand funk, you called Terry. What the band didn't realize was that while they were building a sound, Terry was building a trap. Festivals and fury. In July 1969, they got what looked like a tiny break, a surprise slot at the Atlanta International Pop Festival. On that bill were huge names: Janis Joplin, Creedence Clearwater Revival, Blood, Sweat and Tears. Grand Funk were nobodies. Their slot wasn't even paid. They were basically filler between the acts people actually came to see. It was boiling hot. The sound system was rough. Thousands of people were sitting around half bored, waiting for the next big name. Then these three guys from Flint walked on stage. No fancy clothes, no image, just long hair, jeans, and big amps. They were loud. People who were there remember the volume like a physical thing, not art school psychedelic. Not slick California rock. This was more like a locomotive running through the crowd. At first, the audience was confused. Then a pocket of fans near the front started moving, heads started nodding. By the time they hit the end of their set, the crowd was roaring. They had just done what almost no no-name band does at a giant festival. They stole attention from legends. Word spread fast. Musicians talk, road crews talk, promoters talk. Who are these guys Grand Funk Railroad that just blew everyone's hair back in Atlanta? Capitol Records was listening. Thanks to Terry Knight, who pitched them as the next big heavy rock act, they landed a deal with Capitol within weeks. This was late 1969. Labels were hunting for hard rock bands after Hendrix and Cream, and these three kids from Flint were cheap, hungry, and already road-tested. Their first album, On Time, came out in August 1969. Critics ignored it. The respectable rock press was into more serious acts. The Who, the Stones, Dylan. Grand Funk was too simple, too blue-collar, 3 chords, lots of distortion, lyrics you could actually understand. But fans didn't care about critic approval. The record didn't crack the top 20 on the album chart. It peaked at number 27. But here's the twist. It quietly sold over 1 million copies and went gold. That meant people were actually buying it with their own money, not just talking about it in magazines. The reason was simple: their live shows. Grand Funk toured like their lives depended on it, because they did. They weren't making real money yet, and their equipment was basic. Old buses, cheap motels, or sometimes no motels at all. It was drive, load in, sound check, play, sleep, repeat. When they went back into the studio for their second album, the self-titled Red Grand Funk, later in 1969, they were already tighter. The songs were still simple, but the riffs hit harder. Fans upgraded from "Who are these guys?" to "These are our guys." In 1970 came Closer to Home, and with it, the song that would define a generation of listeners, I'm Your Captain, Closer to Home. It wasn't just another loud rock song. It was longer, more emotional, and somehow captured what a lot of young Americans, especially soldiers in Vietnam, were feeling. Lost at sea, wanting to get home, not sure if home even wanted them. Vets later said they played that song on endless loop, on ships, in barracks, back in tiny apartments stateside. It hit number 22 on the charts, but its real impact was way beyond numbers. By now, Grand Funk had a pattern. Critically hated, commercially huge. It got weird. The music magazines took shots at them, called them dumb, said they were bombastic and unsubtle. But every time they toured, the venues got bigger. And here's where it gets wild. They did all of this without big hit singles. Most bands climb with radio hits. Grand Funk did it like a touring machine. Their albums sold. They were making Capitol Records a lot of money. Their live album in 1970, simply called Live Album, went multi-platinum and showed off exactly why fans were obsessed. The raw, high-energy experience you could almost feel through the speakers. They were on their way to something no one expected. But at the same time, the business side, quietly run by Terry Knight, was going off in a very different direction. While they were sweating on stage, Terry was negotiating deals where he controlled the master recordings and, according to the band, took a huge cut of everything. Recording budgets, tour profits, even their publishing the rights to their own songs. The band saw crowds, Terry saw contracts. By 1971, this tension, success on the surface, danger underneath, was building to a moment that would define them forever. A stadium in New York City that used to belong to four guys from Liverpool. Stadium high, money low. On July 9, 1971, Grand Funk Railroad walked into history at Shea Stadium in New York. Shea was the place the Beatles had turned into a rock temple in 1965. They'd sold it out in about 2.5 weeks. For years, that was the bar for stadium rock. Grand Funk didn't just meet that bar, they jumped over it. They sold out 55,000 seats in 72 hours, 3 days. No massive mainstream radio hit pushing it. No Rolling Stone cover story hyping them up. Just album sales, FM underground radio, and a fan base that treated them like working-class heroes. Ticket prices were low by today's standards, just a few bucks a head. But packed into that stadium, it looked and sounded like the entire East Coast had showed up. When Mark Farner came in by helicopter and looked down at the stadium, he swore it was literally bouncing with the crowd. Think about that. 3 guys from Flint who could have been on an assembly line, now standing on the same field the Beatles had once made legendary, beating their ticket sale speed record. If you only looked at the crowd, you'd think they were rich beyond belief. But what if I told you that at their absolute peak, while they were breaking records at Shea, they were still basically on a glorified salary? Here's how it worked. Terry Knight set up the band's business in a way that, according to them, gave him massive control. He was manager and producer. That meant he took a manager's cut from touring and merch and also owned or controlled the master recordings. The masters are like the source files of the albums. Whoever owns those gets paid when the label sells or licenses the music. The band later said they were getting about a tiny fraction, some accounts say around 6%, of the gross income, split 3 ways. Terry's company, on the other hand, was pulling in many times that. Now, exact numbers are messy and people argue about them. But the pattern is clear. The guys sweating under the lights were getting less than the guy in the suit. Shea Stadium looked like a victory. Behind the scenes, it was Terry's victory. Over the next year, they pumped out more music, Survival and E Pluribus Funk in 1971. The touring never stopped. The schedule was brutal, hundreds of shows, little rest. Their bodies held up because they were still young. Their finances? Not so much. Eventually, Mark and Don started asking questions. Where was the money? Why were they playing these massive shows but not seeing the kind of life-changing cash they expected? Why were they working nonstop but still worrying about bills? Bookkeeping meetings started to feel off. Answers weren't clear. There were complicated corporate structures, expenses, fees, classic red flags. By 1972, the tension boiled over. The band says they finally sat down, dug into the numbers, and realized how bad it was. They claimed Terry Knight and his companies were taking roughly 3 times what the band was making. For every dollar they earned, Terry pulled in multiple. From their point of view, this wasn't just a bad deal. It was betrayal. So they did the only thing they felt they could. They fired him. No slow fade, no gentle parting. One day, Terry was their manager and producer. The next day, he wasn't. But this is where it gets crazier. If you fire the guy who controls your contracts, your masters, your money flow, you don't walk away clean. Within months, Terry Knight hit them with a lawsuit that became infamous, a $57 million claim. $57 million in the early 1970s is like hundreds of millions now. It wasn't just a demand, it was a weapon. The lawsuit argued over everything: contracts, ownership of the name Grand Funk Railroad, publishing, gear. While the lawyers started fighting, banks and labels froze money connected to the dispute. Royalties stopped flowing. Accounts got locked. Imagine that. You're in one of the biggest rock bands in the world, and suddenly you cannot get your own earnings. The only thing still moving was the tour machine. They had shows booked, tickets sold, fans waiting. They needed that cash just to survive the legal war, to pay lawyers, to pay crew, to pay rent. And then came the night at Madison Square Garden, where everything that had gone wrong behind the scenes finally exploded in public, seized at the Garden. It was December 23, 1972, 2 days before Christmas. Grand Funk Railroad was scheduled to play a sold-out benefit concert at Madison Square Garden in New York. The show was for Phoenix House, a drug rehabilitation organization. Good cause, big venue, holiday timing. The place was packed. Backstage, though, the mood was tense. They were already in the middle of this massive legal battle with Terry Knight. Money was tied up, lawyers were circling. But the fans didn't know any of that. To them, it was just a night of rock and roll. Minutes before showtime, Terry Knight walked into the building with sheriff's deputies. He was carrying a court order that allowed him to seize the band's gear as part of his lawsuit: guitars, amps, drums, PA equipment. Basically, everything they needed to be Grand Funk Railroad. The deputies had the authority to take it all. Picture this. The band is getting ready to go on. They can hear the crowd rumbling through the walls. A knock on the dressing room door, and suddenly there's your ex-manager pointing at your gear and saying, "Those are mine." If they refused to play, 20,000 people in the Garden would erupt. If they played when they walked off, their tools, the instruments they used to build their careers, would be gone. After frantic talks between lawyers, promoters, and the band, they made a deal. Grand Funk would go on. They'd give the fans the show they paid for. But when it was over, Terry and the deputies would be allowed to roll their cases in and start taking gear. So they played. By all accounts, they poured everything into that set. Maybe out of anger, maybe out of pride, maybe both. They didn't tell the audience what was happening. They just did the job. Then they walked off stage and watched strangers start unplugging their amps. Terry later said he did it to teach them a lesson, to show them they couldn't just cut him out. He wanted that moment to hurt. It worked. The legal battle dragged on into 1973. The band couldn't keep fighting forever. Lawyers are expensive and their income was already squeezed. In early 1974, they finally reached a settlement. Grand Funk would keep the name. That was huge. Without the name, their touring business was dead. But Terry Knight kept control of most of their early catalogs, publishing, and the masters. In simple terms, that meant that the rights and a lot of the future money from their first wave of albums, On Time, Grand Funk, Closer to Home, Live Album, and more, were gone. Those were the songs that made their name. I'm Your Captain, foot-stomping music. All the tracks that veterans and factory workers had turned into anthems. The band would see little or nothing from those songs for years. On top of that, legal costs and frozen funds had drained them. They were famous, but almost broke. They had one way out: make new music so big that it could pay for everything. But the rock world had changed. Radio was shifting. FM stations that once played 10-minute album cuts were moving to a hits format. Shorter songs, tight hooks, clear choruses. Grand Funk had to adapt or die. So they made a choice that would save their career and quietly tear their unity apart. Hits, compromise, tension. In 1973, Grand Funk Railroad did something they'd spent years resisting. They hired an outside producer to help them chase radio hits. That producer was Todd Rundgren. Rundgren was already known as a studio wizard. He understood how to turn raw ideas into polished songs that radio programmers loved. Shorter, catchier, cleaner. Everything Grand Funk had never been. They walked into the studio to make what would become We're an American Band. The title track is the perfect example of what they were trying to do. It's under 4 minutes. It is a drum intro you can recognize in half a second. The chorus is simple, proud, and made for arenas. We're an American band. No deep poetry, just a statement. Don Brewer, the drummer, actually sang lead on it. That alone was a change. Mark Farner had been the primary voice of the band. Now Don was out front on their most commercial song. When the single came out in July 1973, it exploded. It shot up the charts and became their first #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. Radio loved it. Fans loved it. The album went gold, then platinum. Financially, this was the oxygen mask they needed. But there was a cost. To recreate that polished, layered sound live, they needed more texture. More than just guitar, bass, and drums. So they brought in keyboardist Craig Frost, at first as a session player, then as a full-on member. This broke one of Mark Farner's core beliefs about the band, that they were meant to be a power trio. 3 guys, no keys, no extras. Now they were 4. The sound was glossier. Organs and pianos were filling out the songs. Some fans loved the bigger sound. Others missed the raw power. The label saw what worked and doubled down. In 1974, they released Shinin' On, again produced by Rundgren. It had their next giant hit, a cover of The Locomotion, a pop song from the 60s, reworked as a hard rock stomper. It went to #1, too. In 1975, they did All the Girls in the World Beware. That's where Some Kind of Wonderful and Bad Time came from. Both big hits, big radio singles. Bad Time climbed to #4. From the outside, this second act looked like a total win. They'd beaten the lawsuit, survived the financial disaster, and turned into a hit-making machine. Inside the band, it felt different. Mark Farner had always seen Grand Funk as a band for working people who felt ignored. Veterans, factory workers, kids who didn't go to college. The early songs were simple, but they felt honest. Now they were, as Don Brewer later admitted about Bad Time, veering into very pop, sugary, sweet, syrupy territory. Songs designed more for radio playlists than for the guys in the cheap seats. On top of that, Mark's personal life was changing. He had become a born-again Christian. That started to affect what kind of lyrics he was comfortable singing and what kind of lifestyle he wanted on the road. The endless parties and chaos didn't appeal the same way anymore. Musically and personally, the center of gravity was shifting. There were arguments over direction, which songs to record, who got to sing lead, how much to chase radio, how much to stay rooted in their original sound. The schedule didn't help. Albums almost every year. Tours stacked back to back, little time to breathe or reset. By 1976, the strain was too much. They released Born to Die in 1976, a darker, more serious record that didn't hit like the earlier stuff. Later that year came Good Singin, Good Playin, produced by Frank Zappa of all people. Critics actually liked that one more, but it was too late. Don Brewer reached his breaking point. The fun was gone. The band was fighting itself. The business had burned them. The music felt compromised. I'm over it, man. It's over. We're through. With that, the original Grand Funk Railroad, Farner, Brewer, Shocker, fell apart. They didn't have some giant farewell, no big final concert movie. They just stopped. Don Brewer and Craig Frost went on to join Bob Seger's Silver Bullet Band, where they found steady work, big tours, and fewer wars over direction. That gig would last for years. Mark Farner tried going solo. He had the voice, the guitar, and the name recognition. But solo careers are hard, especially when your original band's catalog is tied up in messy contracts and your brand is split. For a while, it looked like Grand Funk would just be one of those 70s stories. Huge for a few years, then gone. But the story wasn't done. Because the world they came from, those factory towns, those fans, they don't forget that easily. Comebacks and contracts. By the early 1990s, something interesting started happening. Classic rock radio was exploding. Stations realized that people who grew up in the 60s and 70s were now adults with jobs, cars, and nostalgia. Labels reissued old albums on CD. Compilation discs started flying off shelves. For Grand Funk Railroad, this was free advertising. I'm Your Captain. We're an American band. The Locomotion. These songs slid into constant rotation. A whole new wave of listeners who weren't even born in 1971 suddenly knew the choruses. Promoters noticed. A promoter's dream is simple. A band with a lot of recognizable songs and a fan base old enough to buy tickets and babysitters. So in 1996, 20 years after the breakup, the rumors turned into phone calls. What if the original Grand Funk got back together? Farner, Brewer, and Shocker agreed to try it. They rehearsed, hit the road, and found out something surprising. The demand was real. They were playing to crowds of 10, 15, 20,000. Summer festivals, amphitheaters, nostalgia packages. People showed up in old tour shirts that barely fit anymore, with kids in brand new ones. For 3 years, the reunion mostly worked. Old wounds were pushed aside. Money was finally coming in at the level their fame had always suggested. They weren't kids sleeping on buses anymore. They were grown men flying to dates, staying in nicer hotels, playing the same songs that had once shaken stadiums. But under the surface, the old tension was still there. Different views on business, different views on faith, lifestyle, even politics. Still, compared to the Terry Knight era, it felt calm. Then came 1998. According to Mark Farner's later interviews, Don Brewer came to him with some paperwork. The pitch was simple. They should put the Grand Funk Railroad name into a corporate structure, a company. That way, they could protect the trademark from outsiders, split things cleanly, and keep it safe for the future. That's a very normal thing for bands to do. Big acts often put their name and logo into a corporation or LLC. The shares represent ownership. Farner says he trusted Don. They'd been through everything together. They'd survived Terry Knight, lawsuits, gear seizures, breakups. This was his drummer, his bandmate, his brother. So he signed. Only later did he realize what that paper actually meant. Under the new setup, the trademark, Grand Funk Railroad, was now controlled by a corporation where Farner did not have equal control. The details are complicated, and both sides tell the story differently, but the end result was simple. Brewer and Shacker could outvote him. In 1998, Mark Farner left the band again, this time for good. He says he was pushed out. Brewer says Mark quit to go solo, and they just kept the band going. Either way, when the dust settled, Don Brewer and Mel Shaker still had the legal right to tour as Grand Funk Railroad. Mark Farner did not. He could still perform the songs he'd written and sung. That's his right as a writer and original artist. But he couldn't use the name on the marquee. To keep playing, he formed Mark Farner's American Band. Notice the wording. It echoes, "We're an American band," without crossing the trademark line. Smart, but also kind of heartbreaking. The situation got legal, fast. Farner challenged the trademark arrangement, arguing he'd been misled, and essentially signed away his birthright to the band's brand. Courts looked at the contracts. The painful truth with contracts is this: if you sign it, it usually stands. He lost. Legally, Don Brewer and Mel Shacker had the right to the Grand Funk name. Emotionally, a huge part of the fan base saw it differently. In their minds, the guy who sang "I'm Your Captain" and fronted them at Shea was Grand Funk. Now there were two camps. On one side, Grand Funk Railroad, led by Don Brewer and Mel Shacker, with new members handling guitar, keys, and lead vocals. Over the years, that lineup would include musicians like Max Carl on vocals and Bruce Kulick, formerly of Kiss, on guitar. On the other, Mark Farner's American Band, playing many of the same songs, telling the same stories from the stage but under his own name. And here's where it gets wild again. Both acts could draw crowds. County fairs, casinos, mid-sized venues, festivals. The nostalgia market is big enough that two versions of the same legacy can both survive. On paper, this was just business. In reality, it was the final fracture of a brotherhood that had already survived one of the ugliest manager betrayals in rock history. The guy who had helped create the original disaster, Terry Knight, wouldn't live to see this full split. In 2004, he was murdered by his daughter's boyfriend in Texas, stabbed in a domestic dispute. A grim, random end to a man whose name is still cursed in Grand Funk circles. But by then, the battle for the name was already over. The lawyers had stamped it. The contracts were signed. Two paths, one legacy, and millions of fans stuck in the middle. One legacy, two trains. Today, if you go online and search Grand Funk Railroad Tour, you'll see dates. They still play. Don Brewer and Mel Shacker are there, the rhythm section that powered Shea Stadium. They're joined by a lineup of pros who weren't there in 1969, but know the songs cold. They play the hits. We're an American Band, Some Kind of Wonderful, The Locomotion, I'm Your Captain. Audiences sing along. For a lot of people in those seats, especially casual fans, that's enough. The logo on the ticket says Grand Funk Railroad. The music sounds right. The night feels good. Some fans don't even realize Mark Farner isn't in the band until the lights go up. Meanwhile, somewhere else, sometimes in the same state on a different weekend, Mark Farner's American Band is on stage. Mark tells stories about writing I'm Your Captain, about playing Atlanta, about that day at Shea. His voice still sounds like the records. For many hardcore fans, this feels like the heart of Grand Funk. Two trains on two different tracks, both claiming the same history. Financially, the brand still has power. Classic rock radio plays their songs every day. Streaming platforms rack up listens, tens of millions of plays on We're an American Band alone. Every spin, every stream, every sync in a movie or ad triggers royalties. Remember those early contracts? A chunk of that money from the first wave still goes along the paths set up in the Terry Knight days and later deals. Some rights have changed hands over time, but the basic shape remains. The early trap still casts a shadow decades later. What's maybe most striking is how the fans themselves have carried the story. Vietnam vets still come up to Mark Farner after shows and tell him, "Your song got me through." Factory workers, retired now, talk about blasting foot-stomping music in cars that cost more to keep running than they were worth. Younger rock fans discover them on playlists and wonder how a band this loud and this big flew under the critical radar. And sitting under all of that, there's this question that never really goes away. If you could go back and change one signature, one handshake, one contract, would it fix anything? Or would something else just break instead? Because in the end, the story of Grand Funk Railroad isn't just about bad deals in courtrooms. It's about a deeper pattern in the music business, and really in any system where a lot of money meets a lot of dreams. Three kids from Flint built a sound that spoke to people who didn't see themselves in polished, critic-approved rock. They outsold the Beatles at Shea Stadium. They survived a manager who sued them for $57 million and literally took their instruments from under them. They clawed their way back with radio hits they weren't always proud of. And then, years later, when they finally thought the fight was behind them, they ended up in a new kind of war, not against a shady outsider, but against each other, over the name on the front of the drum kit. That's the haunting part, because the system that made them legends, labels, managers, contracts, trademarks, didn't just take their money, it twisted their relationships. It turned brothers into business partners. Then it turned business partners into opponents. So when you hear "We're an American Band" on the radio today, or see Grand Funk Railroad on a festival poster, there's a whole invisible story behind that logo. It's the story of three working-class guys who refused to take the safe path, who built something massive from volume, sweat, and stubbornness, and then watched the same machine that lifted them up pull them apart.